Well, for more on this, Jan Egeland joins us live from Dakar in Senegal. He's the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council. Jan, thank you so much for joining us on the News Hour. Burkina Faso doesn't have the highest number of displaced people, and yet you've placed it at #1. Can you just explain why that is?
Well, Burkina Faso scores the worst in terms of media attention per person in need, aid per person in need, and diplomatic and political attention to solve the crisis per person in need. It's beyond belief the neglect which is for the people who are suffering in Burkina Faso. It's really never in the news. It has very little aid, and it seems that people have given up in trying now to have political solutions there. But the situation is terrible. I was in the northern city of Dori in the Sahel region of Burkina Faso, and I saw tens of thousands of people who have fled the surrounding villages that have been torched. Their livestock have been killed, and many of their relatives, husbands, brothers have been killed.
Yeah, the conditions that some of these people are facing, as you say, are just horrific. We heard in that report from Cameroon a human rights lawyer saying that the international community considers some of these conflicts as domestic issues, which in some way enables them to ignore these conflicts to some extent. I just wondered whether you agreed with that, and what other factors are at play which allow these displacements to become so neglected.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I don't know if we'll call it domestic. I would say that much of the outside world now treats some of these cases and wars as if they are hopeless. Well, we tried to help, but it didn't work, and now we're turning our back to the people there. It's the catastrophic policy to take away development aid, as has happened to several of these countries, because we don't like the new military rulers. The aid was supposed to go to very poor people, to go to the most needy, etc. Then there are countries also who are believing there is only a military solution to the violence. We have to crush everyone who has the weapon that is in an opposition to the government. Well, there is no pure military solution. The solution is developmental, it's humanitarian, and it is political and diplomatic. I'm glad Turkey is involved in many of these places. I hope Turkey can be more active in securing humanitarian access for us to all people in need, and also that Turkey will try to facilitate conflict resolution initiatives.
Jan, you mentioned the media earlier. These displacement crises affect vast numbers of people, but your report says media and public engagement is challenging and inadequate. Why is that? Why is it so difficult to get coverage?
Well, there are some of these countries that have limited the access for international journalists. In Burkina Faso, it's well known that several of the main media organizations have been thrown out of the country. But there's also a lot of media organizations, I think TRT is a good exception to that, that doesn't really care about many of these biggest neglected crises. Not even the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a huge country which has the largest hunger crisis in the world, and Sudan, which is also on our list of neglected crises, which has the largest internal displacement crisis on earth, bigger than Ukraine, bigger than Gaza, doesn't really get the attention that is needed.
And so amid all of that, it's perhaps no surprise that fundraising for these humanitarian crises is really difficult. And you've definitely highlighted that in your report, which suggests a $32 billion shortfall in aid budgets. $32 billion sounds like a lot. It is a lot. By comparison, I just like, when there's big numbers like this, to compare it to something. But it is the same as the budget for the US Space Force this year. And I just wondered how you might go about fundraising, especially in this global economic downfall, which has impacted Western countries as well.
And it's true that I, as an old humanitarian worker, I've never seen a period where we have so little per person in abject need. There is 120 million people fleeing violence around the world at the moment, 120 million. 12, 13 years back, it was just over 40 million. So it's a threefold increase in a bit more than a decade, and that we have much less per person in need now than we had 12 years ago. And there are too few consistent, predictable humanitarian aid givers. I mean, my country, Norway, has less than 6 million inhabitants. So how come we can be the 6th or the 7th largest provider of humanitarian assistance in the world? We're not a G20 country. So many of these G20 countries, the big economies, they're not there. They're putting moonlanders on the far side of the moon. Very expensive, very difficult, but they're not able and willing to put a well in Dori town in northern Burkina Faso. I get emotional when I think of how much resources there is in the world. You take 5% of the earnings, the net profit of the 5 biggest companies, and all of the needs in all of the humanitarian emergencies worldwide would be covered.
So what can people sitting at home watching this do? How can they help?
There are many things. Try to speak to your government and your parliamentarian and say, my country needs to show solidarity with these, the most persecuted and least assisted people on earth. We want to have more compassion from our country. That's number one. Number two, that we want there to be diplomatic and political and developmental initiatives to solve these crises that are complex. It's grievances connected to land rights, to ethnic groups against each other, religious groups against each other, etc. It needs conflict resolution efforts. And then also ask the media to cover these crises, because if there is no attention, they will remain neglected, and we will remain having endless problems. And finally, you can also go to the webpage of NRC, nrc.no, and support our work. We're there in all of these 10 most neglected emergencies, and we're providing good relief, but our local aid workers on the ground are overstretched and underfunded.
Jan Egeland from the Norwegian Refugee Council, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today, and best of luck with your work across all of these really challenging situations.
Thank you.